Welcome to the Republic Brothers Podcast. We're cutting through the noise, defending the truth. I'm Mike, joined by my brother Matt, and we break down the issues that matter most to conservatives and everyday Americans. Today we're diving into the government shutdown, illegal immigrants, and some world news. Let's get started. Matt, get us started with the latest on the government shutdowns.
Bipartisan talks on reopening the government began with Republicans and Democrats trying to find some middle ground. So far, neither side has been willing to buckle as time has ticked by. The Senate will be out on Thursday to observe Yom Kippur, but is expected back Friday. With votes going into the weekend, talks will continue and negotiations will take place, as they did on the floor of the Senate today. Democrats say they're afraid that anything they sign, President Trump will just rip up. So the question I have for you is, how long do you think this could take? And who buckles first?
Well, I think it's kind of hard to say at this point. So the last time we recorded, I didn't realize that the Democrats were trying to spend over $1 trillion they're trying to add. And that the Republicans are basically saying, hey, let's just keep signing the same thing that we signed last time, the same thing that Democrats already signed, like a dozen times before, just so that they can keep working on things. But now the Democrats are like, nope, that's not good enough. We're going to shut the government down. So there's no telling, to be honest, how long this is going to go. If I had to put money on it, I would guess 14 days. I'm going to guess 2 weeks. That's the over-under.
Well, the blame game has begun already. I think both sides will look and see how the general public reacts. If one side's getting blamed overwhelmingly, I think that side is far more likely to cave. That could be in a week, that could be in a month.
Yeah, and I saw something about Chuck Schumer not wanting to agree to anything because of AOC possibly coming after his spot. And so now he feels like he needs to stand his ground or he might lose an election.
He would be wise to come back towards the center. But yeah, I do think there's some fear that someone like AOC will go and find him a primary challenger. And in his district, it would be tough to beat someone farther to the left of him. Now, I wonder if posting AI memes on Truth Social will get us anywhere. Did you see Trump's sombrero meme of Hakeem Jeffries?
I did see the meme. I thought it was hilarious. I did see somebody ask J.D. Vance about it as well. I liked his comment about how we'll stop with the memes whenever they cave.
Well, you said it was funny, but was it racist? Because that's how it's being portrayed by the media.
I don't think it was racist. I think it was a joke, and I think that the Democrats in the same position would take advantage of the exact same thing.
I thought it was pretty funny too, and I will happily watch any more memes posted.
Definitely. All right, next up, we found out today that Tyler Robinson has himself a brand new set of attorneys, Matt.
Yes, a Utah court has finalized his legal team, and he's adding 2 pretty seasoned California defense attorneys to join his lawyer in Utah. Michael Burt of San Francisco and Richard Novak of Pasadena were both granted permission by the court to appear on Robinson's behalf at his latest hearing Monday. Burt has nearly 5 decades of experience as a criminal defense lawyer, most notably defending Joseph Menendez during the Menendez brothers trial in 1993. You may recall that ended in a mistrial, and they were convicted at their second trial, but they did score some major victories earlier this year when a Los Angeles judge reduced their sentences.
Tell us again, what was the charges on the Menendez brothers? What happened with them?
The Menendez brothers were accused of murdering their mom and dad in cold blood, premeditated. I don't know exactly what the charges were at the time, but Burt has tried more than 50 cases, including quite a few death penalty cases. The other attorney, Richard Novak, has been practicing law since 1990 and has worked more than 24 capital cases in federal court and in the state of California. During the hearing Monday, Robinson's attorneys requested a 30-day delay to give them more time to go through the discovery that prosecution are expected to hand over. Keep in mind, the Justice Department has not yet ruled out whether it will bring its own case against Robinson, so this is the state trial, where he is charged with aggravated murder, felony discharge of a firearm, obstruction, and witness tampering. So what do you think, Mike? Two very experienced lawyers. I would imagine these guys are pretty good. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think there's any attorney in the world that's going to be able to save this kid from what's coming to him. I still think that the FBI and the investigation has a lot of information that they're not giving to the public. And I think they have the proverbial nail in the coffin.
That may be the case. I certainly don't blame him for going and getting the best lawyers he can get. He's going to need all the help he can get, I think.
Was there any information about whether these attorneys were doing this pro bono or were they state appointed? I can't imagine that Tyler Robinson is paying for this out of his pocket.
I haven't heard anything about it being pro bono. He did have a state appointed attorney.
So you think maybe these other two lawyers just jumped in for the publicity?
Possibly. I don't know if this is good publicity, although they say any publicity is good publicity. I'm not sure how many lawyers look at the win-loss ratio. I'm curious if they saw evidence before agreeing to join that they felt like they could win this case. I would say I think it's a good thing that some attorneys are at least willing to help the kid. It'd be terrible if nobody would agree to be on his side during the trial. It's a good thing that he will get his day in court, and it's perfectly reasonable for him to have seasoned defense attorneys on his side.
Yeah, the last thing we want is for this to go to trial and then for him to be able to come back later and say that his attorneys were incompetent and get a verdict thrown out or get a retrial or something like that.
Yeah, you hope for a smooth, clean court case. That's usually not how it goes. I would expect this one to get dirty as well. I'm sure we're years away from knowing the end result, though.
Yeah, I think this is going to drag out for 2 to 3 years, to be honest. All right, but we've given Tyler Robinson too much airtime, so let's move on to our next thing. The FBI and Kash Patel announced today that they are cutting ties with the ADL over their TPUSA stance.
FBI Director Kash Patel is cutting ties with the Anti-Defamation League after the Bureau forged a relationship with them under former boss James Comey. On May 8, 2017, Comey addressed the ADL National Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C. He began by referencing a 2014 speech which he called a love letter to the ADL, and added 3 years later, "I can say, from the perspective of the FBI, we're still in love with you." He concluded his speech with the words, "Love the FBI." Now, the ADL is facing some backlash from Republican lawmakers and Elon Musk. Turning Point USA is labeled as an extremist group. As a result, the ADL has decided to remove its entire glossary of extremism and hate. The ADL said that with over 1,000 entries written over many years, the glossary of extremism had an increasing number of entries that were outdated and saw a number of entries intentionally misrepresented and misused. Elon Musk posted on X, quote, "The FBI was taking their hate group definitions from the ADL, which is why FBI was investigating Charlie Kirk and Turning Point instead of his murderers." In a separate post, Musk referred to the ADL as a hate group. To me, anything the ADL doesn't agree with, they will label extremism or hatred. We've seen many examples. We've seen over the years that they don't always defend the things you would think the Anti-Defamation League would defend. They fight to end anti-Semitism, but it doesn't seem like they ever actually do anything.
So I saw something about we have to keep in mind this James Comey guy is also under indictment currently, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
This is also the same FBI regime that I believe Charlie Kirk was saying was he feared that they were investigating him.
There's a good chance they were. If the FBI is taking who a hate group is from the ADL, and the ADL is listing Turning Point, I would imagine that would get you investigated. Comey is under investigation for false statements and obstruction of congressional proceedings. How political those charges are, I don't know. I always thought when Comey was in charge of the FBI, it did not run smoothly, and he looked to arrest some of his political enemies, meaning anyone who didn't agree with him or Democrats. So, Mike, what are your thoughts on illegal aliens driving commercial vehicles? How does it make you feel to know someone who might not speak or read English is driving an 80,000-pound truck?
Imagine the companies that employed these illegal immigrants, and they get pulled over and end up going to jail, and all of the merchandise that they were carrying is now locked up in an impound lot, and they have to pay the fees to get it back.
They do, but they took that risk when they hired the individuals. Did you see in Oklahoma, the police did a sting on Interstate 40 coming in from Texas? ICE caught 90 truck drivers who were, quote-unquote, undocumented. They came from 18 different countries around the world. They all had a CDL, almost all of them from other states, mostly California. Undocumented is a kind word to describe someone here illegally. It concerns me that we let people who can't read the signs on the road drive trucks that are 80,000 pounds. We've seen multiple instances over the last 6 months where an illegal immigrant driving one of these trucks makes an illegal U-turn or something along those lines, like we saw in Florida, and it results in 3 innocent people being killed. It bothers me that we let someone who can't read the signs of the road drive a truck that big, when for me to get my driver's license to drive a 4,000-pound car, I had to be able to prove that I knew what all the signs on the road meant.
Yeah, exactly. So tell us a little bit about how exactly they set up this sting.
So ICE and Oklahoma state troopers set up stings at a port of entry in western Oklahoma. Most of those detained were truckers. There were others who were undocumented who were also detained for other crimes. And there were also a few who were documented who had committed crimes. But 90 truck drivers stopped at a port of entry. I would say good job by the police and ICE. I don't know how you feel about how they catch the criminals. Does it matter to you how they catch the criminals as long as they're following the law themselves?
No, I mean, to me, I like this system that they've set up. I actually saw as well that they said this may have been the first time, but it will not be the last time they use this method. I think that it should be happening all over the place. This sounds like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, to not put it so elegantly, but it sounds like a good idea to me.
If they got 90 people in 5 days on one interstate into one state, how many would they get if you did this across 10 or 20 states for a week? I'd like to see this a little more often.
Yeah, just imagine how many more they'd get if they were doing it on the border of Arizona, New Mexico, California, places like that.
I could imagine you would get a lot if you did this in California. I don't think California would ever be too happy with that.
Yeah, I don't see California cooperating with ICE the way Oklahoma was willing to.
Well, you don't want illegal immigrants driving your trucks. How about running your schools?
That is even worse.
How would you feel if you were also paying him $286,000 a year?
That is a lot of money for somebody who faked their doctorate and their MBA.
He had a lot of schooling on his resume. If he lied about the doctorate, did he lie about any of the other ones?
I'm sure most of his resume was fabricated.
It's just interesting to me. I'm not overly concerned, regardless of where you came from, when it's time to go, it's time to go. And it's been a year since he was told he should go. But he stayed on. I imagine it would be pretty tough to give up a nearly $300,000 salary.
Definitely.
Now, Mike, I know you worked in law enforcement for a little while. Do you know what the laws say on someone here on a student visa about owning a gun? Because the individual in Iowa, Ian Roberts, he had a hunting knife and a loaded handgun in his car when they stopped him.
I wouldn't imagine that you are allowed to possess a firearm if you are here on a visa.
I just found that very interesting. Did anyone at the school district think to check something as simple as, is he a citizen? Now, I know they claim that they outsourced the vetting process of the candidates for this position, but nobody in the school district thought to look if he was a citizen?
I guess not. And like his resume, most of his life is probably fabricated. It blows my mind that he could get by something like this. Like, you would think a simple background check would be like, oh, hey, red flag.
Yeah, I would advise them to find a new company to do the vetting process for them. If they failed on something that simple, you might want to take your money elsewhere.
Yeah, they should probably be asking for a refund. All right, so now that we got some of the illegal immigration stuff out of the way, I wanted to ask you about this next thing that I saw. What exactly is Trump's 20-point plan for peace? What does that entail?
Yeah, so Trump came up with a 20-point plan. He's gotten most of the world to agree to this. It's a more than fair plan. The Arab nations have signed off on it. There's a lot to the plan. The general principles of it are de-radicalizing Gaza and making it a terror-free zone, redeveloping the territory of Gaza for the people of Gaza. One of the points is the war ending immediately. Israeli forces will withdraw and prepare to receive the hostages, and within 72 hours, all hostages alive and deceased being returned. Full aid would return to the Gaza Strip. No one would be forced to leave Gaza, and anyone who wished to leave would be free to do so and free to return. But all of that comes with Hamas agreeing to not having any role in the government, directly or indirectly. It's a good plan. It's more than fair. It says Israel would release some of the Palestinian hostages, including the deceased hostages, being a 15-1 trade, one Israeli for 15 Gazans. It's a more than fair deal, and everyone agrees to that, but does Hamas agree to that? I struggle to believe that a terrorist organization would openly give up the power they had and stop trying to destroy the country that it is their life's mission to destroy. Do you think a terrorist organization would give up control? I understand that Hamas at this point is a shell of itself. Most of the senior leaders have been killed. But would the people still in it want to go back to what we would describe as a fairly normal life, but for them would be completely foreign?
Yeah, I can't imagine what any of these people are thinking at this point. I mean, it also seems clear to me now that this could really gain some traction, considering all the other world leaders that are on board with this plan. It seems like at this point, we finally might get to a point where Israel can push a little bit harder on this issue.
And if Hamas doesn't accept, given all of the Arab nations have agreed that this is a great plan and they have signed off on it, how much support would they throw behind Hamas if Hamas rejected this deal? That's something that would be very interesting. I believe Trump said Hamas has 3 or 4 days to decide, so we won't have to wait long to get an answer. I just struggle to believe Hamas would openly agree to give up the power they have. If they choose not to, I do think Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu would go full steam ahead and continue the invasion of Gaza and get their hostages back.
I would certainly hope so at this point. We need to come to an end with all this. And like Trump says, He doesn't want to see war, but sometimes you need peace through strength.
Agreed. It would be nice to see it end. It is a far larger talking point than we maybe need it to be. It did kind of suck away some of the oxygen from the conversation around Russia and Ukraine. This was a pointless war on behalf of Hamas. They only had one intention, and that was to kill Jews. I would hope we can see a day where terrorism doesn't exist. That will never happen. But I hope that Hamas does accept and we can end this war and a little more attention can be put back on Russia, because I don't see that one ending as smoothly as this one potentially could. It's been very rough, very rocky. It's time for an end, and I hope Hamas agree.
Yeah, true. Well, you mentioned Russia and Ukraine, so let's kind of shift over into that. The latest news on Europe's emerging plan and them wanting to give Ukraine $200 billion with Russian money. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so when Russia started the war in Ukraine, they had around $350 billion in offshore accounts, some in Europe, some in America, some in Asia. Well, the American money and the European money was frozen, and now the EU wants to use that money to rebuild Ukraine. They don't want to put Ukraine in a position where they have to pay back an enormous sum of money after the war is over and they rebuild. Russia is obviously going to be a little ticked off that their money is going to be used to rebuild Ukraine. No surprise there. They'll threaten everything under the sun, even though their military is a bit tied up. I'm all for this. It means that the rest of Europe isn't paying for something Russia started. It means Russia would be the ones paying for it. I think that's the best outcome for Ukraine, is to make Russia pay for this some way, somehow.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think that Russia should be the one that has to pay for it. It was their mistake. They played a stupid game, and I think they should win a stupid prize.
And now that Trump, I think, is starting to come around on Putin and see him in a more negative light, I feel like Putin has kind of run circles around Trump with the negotiations. He's just buying his time. He's not really looking for an end. I would like to see Trump get a little harder on him, maybe send some Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. One of my criticisms of Joe Biden was the trickle feed of weapons, especially early on. I understand it for the first few weeks when we thought Ukraine was inevitably going to lose, but once it became clear that they still had some fight in them, I would have liked to have seen us start sending weapons quicker, as well as more advanced weapons. I understand we don't want our F-35s or B-2s falling into Russian hands. That's why we would never give them to anybody. But at some point, you got to give them the tech to fight. Biden kind of asked Ukraine to fight like NATO when he wasn't providing them the equipment to fight like NATO. And Joe Biden always worried about oil prices so much that he limited what Ukraine could strike. We're seeing gas runs in Moscow now because there's a gas shortage. Trump rightly doesn't limit what Ukraine's allowed to target.
Yeah. Do you think that maybe it's a little bit of foreshadowing that Russia just sent out draft letters to, what was it, over 100,000 of its citizens?
I saw 136,000. Well, when you go through about 1,000 a day, you're looking at 7,000 deaths per week. Yeah, you're going to need new troops. I still don't think we're at the point where the people of Russia would have an uprising, though. The biggest concern is always returning children home to their parents in a body bag. That does not go well with any family. That's how you get uprisings. But the Russian people sure can take a lot. There are over 500,000 Russians that are dead. And have we seen any protests in Russia? I haven't heard of anything.
No, there hasn't been anything.
I wonder what it would take for Putin to end the war. I don't think he can. I think he would be overthrown as leader if he lost. So I think he's just going to keep pushing on and hope that we run out of patience and decide to give him what he wants just to end it. I think that's his only play. The Russian population is running out of people, and sending them to their deaths when they're 25 years old is not helping their demographics.
You mentioned their demographic. How many people are there in Russia?
Around 140 million. The interesting part, though, is if you look at a demographics chart which breaks the population down by age, there's far more older people than there are younger people. When you think about a country, older people tend to be the capital. They have the money. Middle-aged people are your consumers and your workforce, and younger people use some of the consumed items. Kids are expensive everywhere. When you look at the demographics, Russia doesn't have a lot of kids, and they don't have a lot of people to have kids. So sending the men to fight is not going to help them. Some people, including Trump, think that if Trump had won in 2020, this wasn't going to happen. I would argue this was inevitable. Keep in mind, Putin was an ex-KGB agent during the Soviet Union, and he wants to restore Russia to its former highs, and that would be in the 80s when the Soviet Union had control of something like 23 other countries. When you look at Russian history, they've been in about 50 wars throughout the history of Russia. They win about half of them, and they avoid losing in some, because when people get past their front line of defense and they start marching towards Moscow, it gets very cold. And the longer supply chains get, and the farther away from your base you get, the harder it is to maintain your military. And as people have gotten to Moscow, cold weather, longer logistics, that's when they've been able to put up a fight. But Russia is a fairly flat place geographically, and they are a very slow-moving army. They are dependent on rail, which is not fast, so the only way they can really defend their homeland is by pushing forward and getting to geographic barriers like oceans or rivers or mountains, and then putting the army on the front line. Russia was always going to do this at some point. Ukraine was going to go first. We would see them go after others, but with as long as this has taken Russia, I don't think they have the military to do it again for a while, and they might not have enough people left to try this again in, say, 10 years. All of that is to say, if I'm Trump, I am sending Tomahawk missiles. This would put much more pressure on the Russians if Ukraine could hit mostly anything on the western half of Russia. Tomahawks have a range of 1,000 miles, and they are very hard to detect because they fly very low. And when you add in, we wouldn't even be giving them away. We would be selling them to other NATO countries, and then they would be passing them on to Ukraine. That sounds like a good idea to me. Mike, would you authorize the sale of these weapons?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they need a show of force, and I think this is a good way to do it. I'm all for it. All right, everyone, that's it for this episode of the Republic Brothers podcast. Here's our big takeaway from today. Government shutdown continues. Illegal aliens get busted driving trucks and working in schools, and Trump's 20-point peace plan. If you enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to follow the Republic Brothers podcast on Facebook, Instagram, X, and Truth Social. Leave us a rating and share this episode with a friend. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.